Bill Boeing was 28 years old when he first saw an airplane fly.
Bill Boeing went to the LA Air Show in January of 1910. Boeing, like many other people in the field, the second they were exposed to aviation, it became a passion. He had other interests and he was making money from other things, but he effectively became an aviation businessman from that very first moment.
Bill Boeing came to maturity at that time when all that was going on. And even though there were all these problems about these lumbering, relatively unsafe, noisy airplanes, he was caught by the magic. I think he was really touched by the magic.
He was drawn to the spectacle of flight, but from the start, he believed that the airplane was more than entertainment.
He has a vision for what it can become, for the future of this product that's kind of frail and fragile in his era.
He envisioned that this assemblage of wood, wire, and cloth, invented by two bicycle mechanics, Orville and Wilbur Wright, would one day be as central to daily life as the railroad and the automobile. Boeing was already wealthy from managing and expanding his timber trading business in the Pacific Northwest. But Boeing's legacy is the company he founded in 1916.
He literally made his first trip out to the West Coast the year of the Wright brothers' first flight. He went out as a natural resource commodity trader, yet envisioned this broad new industry that has driven every corner of our society for the next 100 years.
Everybody now takes aviation for granted. All that stuff had to be invented, every single bit of it.
The Wright brothers' first flying machine inspired imitators and innovators alike. Boeing was bent on innovation. After his very first flight, he was looking for ways to advance the technology of aviation.
When he got off the plane, he was very impressed, but he was also convinced that they could make it even better.
Boeing had the intellect and the means to do just that.
It was a time, much as today, a young man can come up with an app and make some money. In those days, a man with a good idea could maneuver himself into a place where he was in the top of the industry in relatively short order.
There were literally dozens of shops in the United States and Europe like Boeing's company. They were taking the Wright brothers' flying machine as a starting point and running with it.
The Wright brothers were just dealing with the very rudiments of the technology. And then there's the second wave of innovation where you're trying to find applications for it, as in computers, where you get people like a Steve Jobs who actually begin to think in terms of building something that people will use. So when the Boeings of the world came into aviation, he is thinking, what can we use this for?
The company settled on the grounds of a shipyard in a building that would one day be called the Red Barn. They started with a small crew of woodworkers and seamstresses.
Their first planes were built on this muddy little river at the back of some industrial area in Seattle. And they were at first feeling their way. And it was canvas and glue and wood.
William Boeing had a real eye for both engineering talent and managerial talent. Engineers on whose back the future of the company would literally rest.
In 1916, the company hired its first aeronautical engineer.
Wang Su was Chinese, MIT graduate. Bill Boeing hired him. And he, by the way, went back to China after a period of time and helped them found their aerospace industry.
From the start, Boeing was intent on building a viable business. The key was answering the question, what is an airplane for? The early answer to that question was war. Adversaries grasped at any technology that provided an advantage. Even before the First World War began in 1914, European and eventually American armed forces saw the potential of these flying machines.
When the airplane was introduced, suddenly you had a third dimension. World War I was bogged down in trench warfare. People digging into the ground, stuck in the ground, fighting over tens of feet. And along comes the airplane, and I'm no longer stuck in the ground. I can go over all of it.
The obvious value was the ability to scout, to get into the air, fly toward the enemy, and get a view of what was happening out there. The airplane would go out and do what the cavalry scouts used to do.
Boeing's first customer was the United States military. Wong Su was the aeronautical engineer on the Model C. The Navy ordered 50 as trainers. Employees numbered over 300 as the production ramped up to build the Navy plane. But the sudden end of the war in 1918 exposed the boom and bust nature of the aviation business. Military orders dried up. 2/3 of the employees were let go, and the Boeing Airplane Company, for a time, was making furniture. Bill Boeing needed another answer to the question, what was an airplane for? The lifeblood of the American economy after World War I was money and mail. Moving both was what made it work.
Mail contracts created what we know now as the domestic airline business. It's almost as though the United States physically was designed for airmail because of the vastness of the United States. There was a market there for transporting mail. There was no interstate highway network at that time. In fact, planes came before roads.
Even by rail, a letter could take a week to reach the opposite coast. The relatively primitive aircraft of the day promised to accelerate mail and commerce, but at great risk.
Planes were very unreliable, where weather conditions posed extremely severe challenges on aircraft operations, when the airplanes themselves lacked the kind of instrumentation that just a decade later would be routine.